Okay, so I'm just trying to finish off quickly on the Sautranticas. Just looking at my notes, I think give it a clearer explanation than I did verbally of this last point about specifically characterized and generally characterized things or phenomena. So I'll read it out just to refresh your memory. A specifically characterized phenomenon is anything that is the object of a direct perception, normally a sense consciousness. Thus, when you actually see an apple or an orange, even if you have never heard the word apple or seen an apple before, you are aware of a very particular, unique object, having many different qualities such as a particular shape and size, colour, hardness, etc. Nothing else is exactly like this. Hence, it is called specifically characterized, meaning that the characteristics that are perceived apply to just this unique object. Right? So that's direct perception sees a specifically characterized phenomena with all of its unique qualities. On the other hand, if you are familiar with the concept of an apple, you've seen them before, you know the word apple, and you know how to tell whether something is an apple or not, when you see an apple and recognize it as an apple, or just think about apples, you are apprehending a generally characterized phenomenon, the object of a conceptual consciousness. We can think about an apple generally without thinking that it has a particular colour, size and weight, etc. The object of this mental consciousness is called a meaning generality. Is that all clear now? You all right with that? Specific, characterized and generally characterized equates to direct perception or conceptual consciousness.
So, quick question.
Yeah.
If I think at my grandmother,
yeah,
a thought appears in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So the thought is a specifically characterized phenomenon. The thought itself.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
True. Yeah. I mean, yeah, so a mental image of your grandmother appears to your mind. So that mental image is an individual thing, a specifically characterized phenomenon. But it's also, it's a consciousness. So it is relating to its object as a generally characterized phenomenon. Yeah.
It's like the referent is
the referent
characterized.
Yes.
The thought itself.
Yeah.
Is
so the appearing object is an image, which is a specifically characterized phenomenon. The apprehended object is a generally characterized phenomenon. If you didn't understand that, don't worry. Okay, so this is very important, especially when we're talking about the subject of the two truths, because this is the Sautrantica's view of reality. The difference between ultimate and conventional truth is very, very much linked to this distinction between direct perception and conceptual thought, between the specifically characterized and generally characterized phenomenon. So they say that generally characterized phenomena, that what the conceptual thought understands or apprehends. Okay, so like in this case, you know, the general thought, an orange, that is a conventional truth. Okay, it's not ultimately real. There's no such thing as orange generally, right? It's not something that exists in its own right from its own side. This orange, according to the Sautrantica, does exist in its own right and from its own side. It's ultimately real. But when I see the orange and then think about it, you know, what appears to my mind when I have the thought of an orange, that is, in some sense, is illusory. Doesn't mean that conceptual consciousness is a bad idea because we need it. You know, like 90% of how we operate is from conventional consciousness. We use our thinking process to work out how to operate within the world, and we'd have a problem if we didn't do that. But what happens for us ordinary beings, okay, those who are not enlightened, is that we confuse the concept with the object. Okay. So my concept of an orange does not correspond exactly to this particular thing that's right here that I'm seeing. So as Danny was saying, you know, I could have all sorts of expectations about it based on my concept, which would turn out to be incorrect.
Can I just double check?
Yeah.
So the specifically characterised phenomena is ultimate?
Yes.
What it said?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is an ultimate truth. Yeah. What appears to my eye consciousness when I see the orange, that is an ultimate truth. But what appears to my mental consciousness when I think about the orange is an image or a concept of the orange, and that is not real from its own side. Okay? Yeah.
So Mel just said a specifically characterised phenomenon is an ultimate truth.
Yes.
But it's not the ultimate truth of how the apple or the orange actually exists, is it? Ultimately.
According to the Sautrantica, yes.
According to the Sautrantica, okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
So this is, we need to bear this in mind all the time, you know, as to whether we're talking from the point of view of a particular sub-school or whether we're talking from the point of view of the final view, which is in our tradition, is Prasangika Madhyamika, but some would disagree.
That terminology applies to Sautrantica.
Yes, that's their view. Their view is that what is perceived by a direct perception is ultimately real. Yes. And they say that it's external to the mind as well. Okay. So those of you who did read the section from Geshe Tashi's book and from my notes, there's a table showing the correspondence between all of these different things which are synonymous. So specifically characterized phenomenon is same as object of direct perception, is same as ultimate truth, right? All those are the same. And there are 4 others. As well as that, they say that is also a thing. So the orange is a thing, but the concept of orange is a non-thing. Okay? The specifically characterized phenomenon is real, and it's a functioning thing. This is something quite a number of the schools have, is that what is an ultimate truth is what is able to perform a function, what can do something. So this orange can do something, as you said, it can nourish you, right? But the concept orange can't do anything, right? It's not something that operates in the world. It's just an idea. Or effective is another thing. So this is effective. The orange, the specifically characterized phenomenon that's right here, is an effective thing, but the idea or the concept is a non-effective thing. Actually, there's a thing and non-thing. That's also is a technical term there as well. So they say that only that a thing is a specifically characterized phenomenon. A generally characterized phenomenon is a non-thing. Concepts are not things. They're not part of the furniture of the universe, as somebody described it. They are. Okay. How are we doing with that? Conventional truth and ultimate truth in the Sautrantika is what we see directly versus what we think. Concepts. Is that clear?
Yeah, that seems a lot clearer than last time, I think.
All right.
I remember.
Okay.
David, can I just check?
Yeah.
So that a real thing applies just as much to something that's a natural phenomena, like an orange,
Yeah.
as something that's totally man-made, like a piece of steel.
Absolutely, of course. Yeah. So it applies to any physical object or any kind of also conscious mind as well. But only as they appear to a direct perception. Our concept of them is misleading, and we think that we mix up the object and the concept. We continually do that. Okay. So, I think that's probably okay. There was another little sort of debating point, but I think we won't go there at the moment. Just like to open it up to questions for a bit.
Can I ask about animals?
Animals, yeah.
And if they could be considered recognizers, or unto what extent they can have some kind of awareness of these truths. Because they do have consciousness,
yeah,
right? They would
they do.
perceive phenomena, but
Yes.
they wouldn't have concepts. Is that right?
Well, that's a very good point. Good question. If they didn't have conceptual mind at all, but only direct perception, then they would be enlightened. So, certainly according to this philosophy, I think actually according to most of the others as well, for various reasons. So the answer that's given is they do have conceptual mind, even though they don't use language. They're not able to do reasoning in the way that we can. But when I rattle the dish with the little bits of stuff, as our cat's out in the garden, and I put some of the little bits in the dish, and I rattle it outside the door, and the cat comes running. It can't see the food, but it associates the noise with the food. That's conceptual thinking, isn't it? So, although it may be very simple kind of conceptual, they do have it, and they do have, particularly, they have an idea of me. They have self-grasping mind. They have the thought of an I, and therefore they have the basis for suffering. There's always conceptual mind.
Okay.
I'm a little confused. You just at the beginning of that conversation
Yeah.
you mentioned that if animals only had direct perception and not a conceptual
Yeah.
mind, then they would be enlightened. And then you use the analogy of the shaking the biscuits in the bowl,
Yeah.
and that being the cat's conceptual mind to get in to
Yeah.
make the biscuits. So would that be an unenlightened act then, if it's a conceptual thought act to associate with the noise of food to go and to eat? And therefore would that prevent anything becoming enlightened? Do you get what I'm saying about?
Yeah, I mean, an enlightened being wouldn't need to go through that thought process. So, whether Buddhas, fully enlightened beings, that whether they have conceptual mind or not is quite a deep question, actually, which we might talk about when we come to the 5th module. I don't want to go too deeply into it at the moment, but I'll try to give some sort of response. I understand your question. I mean, using conceptual thought is not in itself unenlightened. I mean, it makes perfect sense to use that kind of reasoning. The problem is that we have this very, very deep-seated tendency to confuse the concept with the reality. As soon as we see something, as Chrissy said, we overlay a concept onto it and we distort what's actually there. We don't, so for instance, like my concept of you is based on a certain limited number of interactions that we've had, perceptions that I've had of you. If I bring that to my interaction with you now and see you in terms of the interactions we've had up to now, I could easily miss something, couldn't I? You know, I don't see properly what's there because I'm too sort of bound up with my conception of what's there. So particularly in the Sautrantika school, also in the Yogacara school to quite an extent, and even also in the Madhyamika school in a slightly different way, although conceptual thought can be valid and can be very useful, but it also can create a misperception of reality, which is a problem. Yeah. So fully enlightened being, in a way, doesn't need to use conceptual thought in that way. It is said that they do, in another way, they have conceptual because they are able to perceive everything that we can. They know everything that's, you know, they know our mind completely. So they obviously know the concepts that we have. But their perception or their awareness of those concepts is completely non-dualistic. It's non-conceptual. So you can see that's very complicated, but I didn't want to kind of confuse things with that question. So yeah, it's not that, you know, conceptual mind, according to possibly all the schools from Sautrantika upwards, not the Vaibhashika, according to all the higher schools, I think conceptual mind is always, it always has a mistaken element to it, but it also can have a valid element. So you can have, you know, a conceptual valid cognition or a conceptual mistaken awareness.
So for instance, with the cat biscuits, I mean, it could, that conceptual thought could actually mislead the cat because it's, whilst it most likely would be that the cat would get biscuits, it may not actually be that.
Yeah, it might be a very similar noise, that something's rustling in the trees or something and it thinks it's getting and it runs for its, yeah. So that would be mistaken on the conventional level, right? But according to Sautrantika, all conceptual minds are mistaken in terms of ultimate reality, but they're not necessarily in terms of conventional reality. They might be correct. Okay. Anything else? If there are no more questions, I'm going to go back to the point that I started with. Oh yeah, Chizuru's got a question. You always got a question. I can rely. You're so reliable.
How many do you want? So we defined existing objects and ultimate relative truths in terms of valid cognition.
Yes.
Could you define precisely valid cognition?
Oh, from a Sautrantika point of view, I don't know. What is a valid cognition? I could define it from
because we're having a discussion about you know, dreams or you know, what is a valid cognition?
I could define it from the Prasangika point of view.
Okay.
Okay. So a conventional valid cognition is a perception or conceptual awareness that is not refuted by another conventional valid cognition.
Or also ultimate, maybe?
No, if it can be refuted by an ultimate valid cognition, then it can still be conventionally valid.
Right.
But an ultimate valid cognition is one that is not refuted by an ultimate analysis.
Can you just say that?
An ultimate valid cognition is an awareness that is not refuted by an ultimate analysis. So, I mean, those definitions, as a logician, you might find a certain unsatisfactory nature in those definitions. But the meaning is, for example, you know, this table, conventionally, that's a table. But if I try to find the table among the parts, I can't find it. So, and I can establish beyond doubt that the table, no, I can't find an inherently existing table here. Okay.
And the conventional one was slightly different, right?
Conventionally, it is a table because you know, it can support the object, it can perform the function of a table. And
Yeah. You said
so
it's not refuted by.
yeah. So if I see the table there, but I'm having a hallucination, then
Yeah.
someone else can come along and prove to me that there's no table there.
So that
Yeah.
means you can't have a valid cognition in a dream.
I wouldn't say that you can't have a valid cognition in a dream. No, I mean you might prove a logical theorem in a dream, and then wake up and I had this proved. Now
Yeah.
you might or might not find that the proof was valid. If you found it was valid, then
But you'd have to
what's
validate
wrong with
that outside the dream.
well, you may have validated it within the dream. Why not?
You might become lucid in the dream.
It becomes, but your definition was that perhaps that it
I mean,
could be a.
yogis on the path of seeing, they can maintain full awareness during their dreams.
Yeah.
I'm sure they can have the valid cognitions.
Is that a valid cognition of the content of the dream or the dream itself?
What distinction are you making that? That
It's a bit like a screen and an image put upon it.
well, they could have both. Why not?
And how
And
could, how could that be verified then by another valid cognizer? If it's in a dream.
Well, the yogi wakes up and says, "Oh, I dreamed so and so,"
Yeah.
and if you can prove that, with conventional analysis that's false, then it wasn't a valid cognition.
So if I have,
But if you can't prove that, then it's a valid cognition.
So if I have a dream of the horns of a rabbit,
Yeah.
is that a valid cognition or an invalid cognition?
Well, it depends whether the horns of the rabbit exist or not.
They might exist in your dream, but they don't exist in reality.
If they don't exist in reality, then I would say, yeah. If you wake up and say, "Oh, the horns of a rabbit do exist after all because I just dreamt them," that wouldn't be a valid cognition in my view.
Right.
Great stuff. Okay. Anyone else? I'll go back because I said I've missed something that I missed out because it was relatively less important, but I'll mention this. So I said that the Sautrantikas would say that the orange that I see is an ultimate truth, right? That I see by direct perception. But some of them don't say that. Why? Because the orange has parts. Okay, so each point of the orange is a separate thing, which is similar to the Vaibhashikas. They say that orange is a conventional truth because it can be, when it's mentally broken up or when it is physically broken up, the consciousness of the orange is cancelled. That's their definition of a conventional truth. So because it has parts, they say it can't be an ultimate truth. So some of the Sautrantikas say that, and other ones say that it is. Because although we would all agree that the orange has parts, that's an interesting question of whether my perception of the orange has parts. I perceive all the parts of it. Does that mean I have umpteen different perceptions at the same time?
There's parts in time as well.
Indeed, yes.
So you can break it down time-wise, and you apprehend it all, but not ascertain it all. As
Yeah.
well.
So I think that's another debate within Sautrantika, because the Sautrantikas say that that orange doesn't exist for 2 moments in succession. The Vaibhashikas say yes, it does. Yeah. So that's a debate between the two. So That's another thing we could debate about. I guess I can give you a choice, the debate subject for this afternoon.
I'm dreading the essay for this module.
I haven't set any essays yet because I thought we need to do this weekend before you're really in a position to do an essay. So I will. So a couple of people asked about what are the essay topics. I thought there was no point in setting an essay until we'd done the middle weekend of the 3. Okay, so just looking at it a little bit more then. Hands up if you agree with the people who say that the whole orange is an ultimate truth. Is an ultimate truth. Let's say we're all Sautranticus here, right? So we all agree that something that is an object of a direct perception is an ultimate truth. Okay. So hands up those who agree with the people who say that the whole orange, as I perceive it, not my concept of it, but what I'm actually seeing here, that the whole thing is an ultimate truth. And okay, who of you think that? Put your hand up if you think the whole thing is. Yeah, I got 1, 2. Anybody else? 3. Hands up those who think that it's only the parts that are an ultimate truth. Yeah, okay. Cesare says that. Anybody else? 1, 2. Yeah, 3.
Perception of the parts.
Yeah.
If Cesare says it, I say it.
Now that's what I call a sound reasoning. Correct sign.
Isn't that part of it, though, that, that valid cognition is based on agreement, isn't it? I remember reading that it's...
That depends on your point of view. Some would say that, and some would say it's not because of agreement. Yeah, but that is a valid point of view, yeah. I think for Prasangika, you could argue that, yeah.
That's what I mean, because we all agree it's an orange, therefore it's conventional.
If I've got a friend who also dreams of the horns of a rabbit and tells me that, that my dream of the horns of a rabbit is true.
Well, it could be that all this is a dream that we're all having.
You might be right. Or a nightmare.
I argued that in my final BA philosophy exam, and I couldn't find any flaw in it there. So, yeah, well, there's you know the famous quote from Chuang Tzu, the Taoist philosopher, that I've
not looked at him for a very long time. But
okay, the philosopher who dreamt that he was a butterfly and woke up and wondered if he, in fact, was now a butterfly dreaming that he was a man.
Yeah, rings a bell. Yeah.
Anyway, so back to this one. So okay, so we have three and 3, and who doesn't know?
That's the argument's out of the way.
Okay.
I can vote for.
So we'll just take it one step further. So some of them say the whole orange it's not ultimately an ultimate truth because we just impute orange onto the collection of the parts of the orange, right? It's quite a strong argument that they're giving. The other lot, they say, because it's not possible to have 2 minds happening simultaneously. There's only ever one consciousness happening at a time. They say, well, we have a consciousness of the whole orange at one time. So my perception, my awareness of the orange is one thing. And so because of that, because if you accept that my perception of the orange is a single consciousness, not a number of separate ones, therefore they say the whole orange is an ultimate truth. Whereas the Vaibhashikas, because they don't relate it to consciousness, they just kind of think about these external objects independently of how we cognize them, how we know them. So they say, they're looking at that, well, because we can take the parts, separate them from one another, and then there's no orange, therefore the whole orange isn't an ultimate truth, but it's only the parts of the orange that are an ultimate truth. So some of the Sautranticas are going a little way along with that. They're saying, oh, well, it can only be the part, they agree with them that to impute orange onto the whole thing means that the orange can't be an ultimate truth. In other words, it doesn't exist, you know, from its own side. It's just we impute onto it the idea of orange. So then we can ask the question, well, how far do we have to take it apart? So the Vaibhashikas say, well, it must be till we get down to the partless particles, right? They say anything that has parts can be separated. So that orange must be made up of an infinite number of partless particles. Then the Sautrantikas have a problem, because can you perceive a partless particle? Can there be a consciousness of perceiving something so tiny that it has no parts? What do you think?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a problem, isn't it? So you begin to see like how subtle these debates can be. And this isn't just, you know, it's not just a mind game. We want to understand how we can get a correct view of reality. This is really, you know, this is a, it might sometimes we get a bit lost in very abstract seeming arguments, but it really, you know, it has a profound significance as well. And so, you know, that kind of difficulty is really where the Sautrantika view starts to break down, you know. And this is where the next lot, the Chittamatrins or the Yogacaras, they would be able to attack the Sautrantikas, because in a way they're kind of trying to have it both ways. They are understanding the significance of the fact that mind and the object of mind are interdependent. You know, so that's why they define something real, something exists, if it is the object of a valid awareness. You see, there's like naively, without philosophizing, we might think, well, the existence of this has got nothing to do with my consciousness. But when we start to analyze, we realize the only way we can consistently define what exists is what I can correctly know. Okay? So they're already kind of bringing the reality, bringing the kind of consideration of the mind, the knower, into their understanding of what is reality. But they also want to say that the thing, object, does exist outside, independent of the mind. And because of that, they get into these contradictions. And so the Chittamatrins are able to, you know, demolish their position. So if we let go of the thought that there's something completely independent and separate from the mind out there, but there's just the awareness, fundamentally there's just the awareness, and the awareness has an aspect of something external, right? But which makes us think that there is something real, independent, out there, separate, totally separate from the mind. But the Chittamatrins say no, that's just an illusion. And actually, it's seeing through that illusion is what liberates us from suffering. Understanding the non-duality of the mind and the object that is perceived, that is their understanding of emptiness. That's the Chittamatrins, not the Sautrantikas. So the Sautrantikas say what liberates us from suffering is seeing how we misidentify, you know, well, actually, Sautrantika, the Hinayana view. So both the Hinayana views, the Sautrantikas and the Vaibhashikas, say that what we need to realize in order to be liberated from suffering is the which is the emptiness of persons, not the emptiness of phenomena. So they don't say that phenomena are empty, but they do say that our conceptual mind distorts the appearance of the object.
Right, I'll just check some.
Yeah.
So, for the Hinduyana point of view,
Yeah.
they don't say that phenomena are empty. That's the difference.
Yes, that's right. They do say, though, that you know, that as well as having the misperception that the self exists from its own side, we also misperceive phenomena. Yeah, we like I see that orange differently from how it is because my conceptual thought gets in the way. If I could clear that conceptual thought out of the way and just relate to it from a direct perception, I wouldn't. They would say, well, that direct perception does is how it really is. So in that way, they don't assert that phenomena are empty. But the Chittamatrans and the Madhyamikas, they do, but they have a different understanding of what that emptiness is. So for the Chittamatrans, that emptiness of phenomena is that there's no duality between subject and object. They're not separate, distinct entities. They're two aspects of the same thing. The Madhyamikas, their emptiness is that the phenomena don't exist from their own side. Okay, it's nearly lunchtime. Any more questions? Okay. Then we'll have some lunch. We'll come back at 2 o'clock. Thank you.